Welcome to Pause for Peace with me, Pastor Jule, and here it is, Palm Sunday. During our worship service today, we had a palm procession. Even though the gospel text that I read and used for our sermon, there are no palms actually mentioned, no palm branches mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. Also, no hosannas are mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. So, interesting little unique details about the Gospel of Luke's telling about the beginning of what we Christians call Holy Week. First of all, it's helpful for us to know about this time, not only in the life of Jesus, but also in the life of us today. The Jews are actually celebrating Passover right now. It began yesterday and it will go until next Sunday. And it is amid this tradition that Jesus is a part of. He's a Jewish person and he is with his disciples celebrating the Passover in Jerusalem. There are 3 pilgrimages that faithful Jewish people in Jesus' day are to make to Jerusalem. And one of them is for Passover, one of them is for Sukkot, and one of them is for the Festival of the Booths. And so there are 3 pilgrimages that every faithful Jew was to be making during the time of Jesus' life. And the second temple, actually, of the Jewish people had been constructed during the days of Solomon and then wiped out and then constructed again later in their history. And so at the time of Jesus, there's this massive temple on Mount Zion, which is in the middle of the old city of Jerusalem. And the folks would stream there from all over the world, not live stream. They would stream there in terms of traveling there from all over the world in Jesus' day. It still happens today, to make a pilgrimage and to be a part of this festival of the Passover. And to know more about Passover and what Jesus and his friends were about and what our Jewish neighbors are about these days, Passover is the annual celebration in Judaism that is remembering the way that God liberated the people when they were enslaved in Egypt. So there are rituals. There's actually a particular meal that is taken together during Passover. I'm not a Jewish expert, but I will say I've been a part of a Seder meal and rehearsed some of those scriptures that are looked to during the Passover and the prophecies that are remembered and the history that is remembered, that there was a time in the life of Jesus' people, which means in the life of our faith ancestors as well as Christian people. Our faith ancestors are those who are a part of the Jewish tradition leading up to the time of Jesus, and our Jewish neighbors are still a part of our faith ancestry. We still have common history. And so our faith ancestors, the Jewish people, had been enslaved in Egypt. And it was a really horrible 400-year period in the life of the Hebrew people. And the Pharaoh was demanding that they continue to produce. So the empire of Egypt at the time, under the Pharaoh, which would be like the king, the Pharaoh was demanding that the Hebrew people work harder, work more, do more with less. The people were prolific in terms of reproducing. Many babies were being born, and at times in the history in Egypt, the Pharaoh would be encouraging, really commanding the midwives to do away with the Hebrew boys especially. And there are really fun stories in Exodus about Shiphrah and Puah who refused to follow that order and were sly. They were very sly, very wise midwives who actually helped to keep some of the Jewish children alive, especially one that grew to be named Moses, the one that was drawn out of the water, actually. And Moses is the one who is called by God later on in his life, while his people are still enslaved in Egypt. Moses is called by God to lead the people out of Egypt, to help them to escape this way of being forced to do labor by the Pharaoh and forced to do more and more with less and less. Not only were they making the bricks for the Pharaoh's empire, the way he's expanding with roads and pyramids and everything else, they also, most probably, their hands were being used to create the implements of war, the chariots that would be a part of the Egyptian army and the military structure of the Pharaoh. Fascinating little fact is that Egypt was in the height of these days hundreds of years before Jesus. Egypt was a master at breeding horses. And they bred horses for military reasons. And so there are commands all through the Holy Scriptures that the Hebrew people, after they are freed, they are not to be about this training and having horses. And partly because the story is that the horsemen and the chariots of Egypt actually are swallowed up in the sea as the people follow Moses and are liberated out of Egypt and are passed over any harm coming to them. And this is the story that is remembered. This is the history that is celebrated during these days of Passover, which Jesus was in Jerusalem to celebrate. Jerusalem was actually the place when the Hebrew people actually had their own nation, their free nation. King David would rule from Jerusalem. The other kings ruled from Jerusalem. David's son Solomon ruled from Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem, it was almost like Jerusalem was like the Washington, D.C. of Jesus' day. But very different, very different, because in Jesus' day, the people actually did not have their own king. They were under another empire. They now were under the Roman Empire. Really, the history of Jesus' ancestry, of our faith ancestors, is again and again and again being conquered by various empires and being, if not enslaved, exiled or ruled, oppressed in their own land when they were able to be in their own land by like a foreign empire that was dominating them. And so if you actually read the Holy Scriptures, you will see this theme happening again and again of the people being enslaved, of the people being conquered. It's partly because of the geography of where Israel actually is, but it's also just like this history of the people like dancing with God through all of that, seeking to be faithful to God, even when they are under a foreign empire, like the Roman Empire, which was expanding all over the Mediterranean and beyond. And so in the days of Jesus, it is Rome that had conquered and is ruling over this area. They would rule by putting sometimes their own Roman person was in place. So like Pilate was in place as a Roman to be in Israel and would go to Jerusalem during the Passover. It was like armies would come marching in of Rome in order to keep the peace that was from their perspective while the people were celebrating this Passover, this liberation, this way that God had helped them to flee the domination of an empire. And so the empire at the time, Rome, would very much want to try to keep everything in order. And so Rome also allowed there to be some Jewish rulers over, we might call them the states, but over certain areas or regions of Israel and Judea at the time. And so we have Herod, who is actually Jewish by background, but is in place and leading the government and carrying out the rules of the Caesar back in Rome. among his own people. And so he is also not somebody very much liked in their nation, because he is a Jewish person who is actually standing in for and being the face of the Roman government and the Roman taxes and the Roman ways of really trying to expand. The Roman Empire was very much about installing roads and whatnot so that they would be able to easily move their armies should they need to under a time of war, under a time of attack. And so Jerusalem has this like ancient history of a lot of violence taking place. And even moving beyond the days of Jesus, we have major clashes that take place between Christian crusades and Muslim faithful folks who have now actually have a mosque there. So like it's just like back and forth and back and forth. You can go and read more about the history of Jerusalem. But forever it has been a place where there has been violence and domination and a way of kind of like setting up things that really keeps people separate. And Jesus is in Jerusalem during this Passover week. And so this is where we're entering as Christians, remembering these events that take place with Jesus and his friends. And according to the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus enters into Jerusalem, his friends are so in awe of him and the teachings that they have received that his disciples actually disrobe. They take off their outer cloaks. You can hear more about this from my sermon today. But they take off their outer cloaks and they line the road as Jesus rides atop a colt, which is like a young male donkey. He doesn't choose to be about this whole thing of military might with horses. Jesus humbly comes into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey, on a male colt. And it is when he hits a particular part of the journey, coming down from the Mount of Olives, that like the ruckus explodes. And the canonical Gospels tell this story a little bit differently. There are canonical Gospels that talk about waving of palms, which would be like a celebrating of a royal dignity, a king. The Gospel of Luke tells about the disrobing, the cloaks, which is this just like sign of holy adoration. And really, it's a sign of submission, really, because you take off your cloak, your outer robe, to lay it and to spread it out on the ground. And it's like an act that is showing Jesus, I submit to you in your way. You are my sovereign. I will follow you. And even if it leads into a city where you will be crucified, I still will follow you. There is a way that this week, we call it a very holy week, and it is a rehearsing of not only that entry into Jerusalem, the ways that Jesus is teaching in the temple, and the ways that tensions are mounting. It's already a very tense place during Passover anytime, because like I said, the Jewish people, our faith ancestors, are celebrating liberation, that God frees them from any foreign dominator. And so any foreign dominator at the time is already nervous, and the religious leaders who are very much wanting to be able to still be as a nation, they don't want Rome to like totally come in and wipe it all out, which is what Rome does actually in 70 CE, like 40 years after Jesus. But there's just all this heightened tension, but Jesus is in the temple and he is teaching, and then he's going back out to Bethany, and he is staying with his closest disciples in that area of Jerusalem. But usually it's like every night, either going back to Bethany or out to the Mount of Olives. And amid that all, every faithful Jew was to celebrate a particular meal called a Seder meal. And so there would need to be a lamb. There was all these components that had been a part of the first Passover, when God gave a ritual to the people so that they would be ready to be liberated from Egypt. And so there's a rehearsing of all of this that takes place. And there's this sense that maybe this year at Passover, the liberation will happen once again. Maybe this will be the time that we are released from this foreign domination by Rome. And so Jesus and his friends are rehearsing that as well. And it is when Jesus is with his friends at table that things take a little bit of a turn. An important turn for those of us who are Christians, because it is at that time of celebrating the Passover meal that Jesus actually institutes, we say, a new ritual, a new liturgy that we are to use. And it is the liturgy, it's the institution of two things. In the Gospel of John, sometimes called the fourth Gospel, Jesus actually is instituting the act of loving one another. According to the fourth Gospel, on that day when they are gathering for the Passover meal in an upper room, Jesus actually disrobes himself and ties his outer garment around his waist and gets down and washes the feet of every one of his disciples, every person that was in that room. They're stunned because this is an act that typically is done either by a servant or slave of the household or by a woman. This is not an act that like the free Jewish male would do, that he would get down in the dirt of the floor and would wash the feet of whoever was there. It's a sense like the disciples are so stunned because they're like, wait, we should be doing this to you, Jesus. Like, you're the important one here. Why are you doing this to us? And he institutes this way of loving one another. He actually, it's recorded in the Gospel of John that he says to his friends, love one another as I have loved you. I mean, he's instituting that and saying that and giving that new command, which is what Maundy means, new commandment. Maundy, Thursday is what we celebrate. Jesus gives this new command that you love one another as I have loved you. So he is serving the face of God in every one of them. He is recognizing how important each one of these precious children of God are. And he is enacting this way to honor them, to wash their feet, to massage their feet with like getting all of the dirt and dust of everything they have been through, the roads that they have traveled with him and the roads that they have traveled all throughout their life. He's like washing that all away in this beautiful act of foot washing. And you can read more about this in the canonical Gospels. Some of the stories that recorded there, some of the disciples are a little bit more willing to have that happen than the others. And it is a humbling thing for somebody to drop to your feet and wash your feet. Like, some of us would be like, no, don't touch my feet. Others of us would hopefully like willingly receive this amazing gift and be transformed by the act that we too would want to go and give. And another part of the Gospels at this supper that Jesus is celebrating with his friends is when he actually institutes what we call the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. When he is participating in the Passover Seder, when he is taking particular elements that were common to this celebration of Passover, and he is setting them aside in a little bit different way. He's taking the matzah, the unleavened bread, and it might have actually been the afikomen that he takes, which is the afikomen is like the part of the bread that is hidden away and the children look for it, and there's a whole sense at a Passover meal that there's waiting for the return of Elijah, waiting for the return of a great prophet, waiting for this time of liberation. And so it may actually be the afikomen that Jesus takes, and he breaks it and he gives it and shares it to everybody in the room, and he reminds them to take and eat. This is what he institutes. The Lord's Supper is what we call it. We still participate in this way. It's like, take and eat this bread because this is the way to remember that I'm with you always. this sacrament becomes this like perpetual connection, this perpetual remembering, this perpetual relationship living always in us as we partake of this bread. We don't necessarily use unleavened bread today, but we can. But as we partake of this bread and as we drink of the cup, and the canonical gospels tell the story of Jesus taking this particular cup. Again, the understanding is that he takes the cup that was reserved for Elijah. There's a cup of wine reserved for Elijah in a Seder. And then he takes that cup and he says, take and drink this in remembrance of me. He's instituting like that the wine is a symbol, a sign that reminds you of the lifeblood of the Spirit of the wine, the fruits of the earth. But it reminds us of Jesus, like the Spirit living in him and like all throughout every cell of his body and even in his blood, that this is all given for us. Like his whole life he is living for the betterment of the world, for all of us to know how beloved we are, and all of us to live in such gratitude and generosity as he does, and in such immense trust in God as the God of life, the God who works good for us all. This is what Jesus wants us to remember, that we take of the bread, we drink of the cup, and we remember him. Sometimes you'll hear the words, eat of the body of Christ and the blood of Christ, you might hear. And Christians did get a little bit of trouble at the start of the story. There were people outside of Christianity who would see them partaking this and would hear these words of like, you're partaking of the body and blood of Christ. They would think they were cannibals, actually. But this is, for us, how we believe this as Presbyterian Christians. We believe that this is a way that we commune with Jesus, with God, and with all others as we partake of the bread and drink of the fruit of the vine. So this is a way we stay in perpetual union as we partake of these elements, this holy, holy meal that is instituted for us to always remember what this is about, that Jesus willingly even gave up his body and his blood if it meant that he had to, for love to reign, for love to be shown as the ultimate power that continues and that continues to work for good, that God is the God of life. And if it meant that his own blood and his own body had to be broken and poured out, he was willing to give that gift. Because he so wanted all of his followers and all of us today to see that love is what is left standing, that life is the conqueror, if you will, that life is what comes again after every death. Even as he's humbling himself and washing the feet of his disciples, he is showing that giving up of his own ego and his own need to be stroked and puffed up and lifted up as better than everybody else, like giving all of that up to get down in the dirt and wash anybody's feet. Like Jesus is showing us that we can let go, we can live this life of, Cynthia Bourget talks about it as the life of kenosis. It's the life of emptying of ourselves for the sake of life to continue. It's that circle of that cyclical path. We see it all throughout the year. Everything dies in order to live again. Like everything in spring is coming back to life all in the world. And this is what Jesus is showing us, that this is the pattern, folks. This is the blueprint of the universe. We can trust it, even when it looks like the forces of evil surround and the forces of evil are going to take everything down and drag everything back into some horrible abyss. Jesus is saying, trust God of the God of life. And death is not the end. In fact, death is just the beginning of the new life that will come. This is what we are rehearsing all throughout Holy Week as Christian people. And on Maundy Thursday, after this time when Jesus is giving this new command, which is what Maundy means, which is a day many Christians gather on Maundy Thursday to remember this meal that Jesus is having with his friends. And he is actually arrested after that. And so, like, really things, as the sun is setting, as the night is growing darker, and as the forces of Rome and all of that, voices working against like this full amazing way of love, all of that is like creeping closer and closer. And Jesus actually spends the night in a pit under Caiaphas's house, actually a place you can visit in Jerusalem. I've been there. You can actually see the pit in which Jesus was held as he awaited trial. He was put on trial. He was put on trial by the religious leaders of his day. He was put on trial by the Roman Empire of the day, and it is Rome that actually kills him and says, enough of this. We don't want to hear any more of this love being the way. We don't want to hear any more of allowing people to be healed, allowing people to be freely fed. We don't want to hear any more of that like love rules the day. Away with him. He's killed for blasphemy and sedition. So that's how Friday ends. He's killed. He's in the tomb. He's sealed in the tomb. And the story, we think, ends. I'm not going to tell you what happens next. You're going to have to come back for Easter. Good Friday is the day when many Christians gather, or at least find some way to observe all of that part of the story of what happens from the time of that beautiful meal to the time of like the evil forces coming against Jesus and him being executed as a criminal by the state, and his body literally being flogged, broken, beaten, whipped, all of that horrible stuff. He endures all of that horrible stuff. And really, as he's in that pit before a lot of that begins, and he knows that it's going to be bad. Like, you know it's going to be bad if you're in a pit being held in the darkness and everybody's out to get you. The question becomes, can he trust that life will reign? Can he trust that God is the God of love, and that love will rule the day, even if it means his own life will be snuffed out? I want us to go into a time of reflection right now, because part of Jesus' whole story and this whole thing of Holy Week is really asking us, I think, year after year, or if this is the first time you've heard this story, then it's really asking us to ground ourselves more deeply in trust that like the universe has our back, that God's got our back, and that love, life is ultimately what reigns. And while the circle might happen, the death, life, life, something new always grows. This is what we're being asked to trust, not just in the natural world, but in our own lives. Can we trust that even though everything might look like it's crumbling around us, everything might look like the forces of evil are out to get us, and however you want to define us, everything might look like it's fallen apart and not for good. The question is, can I trust, can I ground myself in love, in light, in life, and be willing to do whatever it takes, right? To like even give of ourselves in the way that Jesus gave of himself for the betterment of those around, for life to reign for everybody. This is what we're being asked to trust a little bit more deeply year after year as we rehearse Holy Week. This is the kenotic, that self-emptying way of living. And we can practice that in our meditations And then we can practice that every day when we allow ourselves to like kind of get out of the way and be a little less controlling, a little bit more willing to let the ways of love lead, to let the ways of cooperating be a part of how we live our lives instead of competing, to be a person who can be open and generous with who we are. And Cynthia Bourget talks about Jesus going through life like a knife goes through a done cake, picking up nothing. Like if you ever have sliced a cake right after it comes out of the oven, it's not done until none of the batter comes off on the toothpick or on the knife. And so Cynthia Bourget talks about in The Wisdom Jesus that Jesus, this kenotic path is about going through life like a knife through a cake, like clinging to nothing, collecting nothing, allowing ourselves to be emptied, open, free for life always to reign. So let's take a little pause for peace right now. And I'm going to lead us through a time of quiet when we'll reflect upon what we might need in our own lives to trust more deeply in the way of love and in the way of life. I don't have that answer for you. You can listen for that answer to arise in this time of quiet as you go inside and get connected with the Spirit of God living in you so that you will know what you need to live a little bit more trust in the God of life and the God of love. I'm going to invite you to get your feet flat on the earth. And you know, the cool thing is, like, the earth underneath us is like the same earth that Jesus walked upon, even though it's not like the same very place. Like, literally, just allow yourself to connect deeply in to the earth. We got Jesus, we got Mary Magdalene, we got the apostles, we got Mother Mary, we got all of these amazing spiritual beings who have lived here on earth somewhere in this globe. The energy that they connected to in the earth is the same energy that we can connect to in the earth as we turn inward, getting our feet flat on the ground and allowing those soles of the feet, those little energetic lines under the soles of our feet to just connect deeply, 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 be so grounded into the earth. Taking a deep breath and releasing it. And when we breathe, if we can just like breathe the air all the way up, the oxygen, the energy, all the way up from the earth, all the way up into our heart. So let's take a few more deep breaths. Hold it before you release. Let's take another deep breath. Hold it before you release. The energy of all of the saints who have lived for the way of love. Just bring all of that energy into yourself as we take another deep breath. We hold it, and then we release. With our focus on our heart space, right here in the middle of our chest. If you're watching, you see me placing my hands in the middle of my chest. If you're listening to the podcast, you can do so as well. Place your hands, your palms on top of each other, and then right there in the center of your chest. If it helps to bend your neck, to be looking towards your like energetic connection between your forehead and your heart space, you can do that. But if that's uncomfortable, there's no need to. Just really invite that energy of your heart space to awaken and open. Anytime in the quiet, something else starts, like popping up in your brain, you just bring yourself back, reconnect yourself to the earth, breathe into your heart space, use your breath to open your heart space, and let everything else go right now. In the quiet of our heart space, knowing that the Spirit of God lives in us, I invite you to take another deep breath and release. Literally feeling yourself connected with the Spirit of God that is within. Body and soul and spirit all connected, psyche all connected through the heart space. And I invite you to pose inwardly the question, asking the Spirit of God in you, what is it that I need to trust more deeply in the God of love, the God of life? What is it that I need to trust more deeply in life, in love? That literally life, light, love will reign for you in your own life and throughout the life of the world. We settle into the stillness, listening, looking, noticing how the Spirit is revealing to you what it is you need to trust more deeply in life, in love, in God being this amazing force of life that ever carries on. Listen deep within. You might even just notice in your body something taking place. That's like how Spirit is revealing to you what it is you need to trust more deeply in the God that is life, that is light, that is love. Let's take one more deep breath. And before we depart this stillness, we want to express gratitude for what has been revealed to us, what we have received, whether or not we like what we receive or understand what we receive. Let us give thanks for what has come. And when we're ready, we'll come back to awareness of one another, of a whole circle of folks involved in meditating through this podcast. whether or not you can always see one another. We don't get to see each other through these means of video and podcasting, but there are others who are participating in this meditative time as well. And so you can come back to the circle, opening your eyes, and perhaps jotting a note or making some kind of association so that you will remember what it is has been revealed to you, so that you can spend this week maybe practicing or incorporating into your day what it is has been revealed to you that you need to trust more deeply. I had two things I'll share actually came. One was remembering a dream. In the process, I was remembering a dream. It was an amazing dream. It was a short dream, but a powerhouse of a dream that I had months and months and months ago. And there were three characters in the dream. I was one of them. I had a sister with me and another relative with me. And I was seeing my mother, who has passed. My mother passed about 3 years ago now. And I was seeing my mother. We were actually on the steps of the church building. And I was trying to like pull my sister in and say, like, can you see, like, Mom is here. And my sister finally could see, and my other relative that was along couldn't. And I got like a bolt came of like awareness in that dream, which was, it's all energy. If only my relative could see, it's all energy. My relative would also know and be connected deeply with my mom, even though she's passed to another realm. And so that came as this meditation was taking place. Like, oh, maybe I need to remember, like, it's all energy, it's all interconnection. And so I can trust more deeply in the God that is life and that is love and that is light, because it's all energy. We're all energy. We're never parted from one another, even if we physically pass from this earth. Whew. Mary the Magdalene is certainly going to learn that on Easter morning, what we're going to celebrate next. And the other thing that came during my time of meditating, I'd love to hear from you in the chat what came for you, was just this deep grounding in the earth. Like my feet just feel like they're super glued to the ground right now. And like there's just this power that I can feel in my feet right now. Just another reminder of like, wow, being so interconnected and so grounded. And the forces may swirl around us in this culture. All sorts of things are going on in this culture right now. And yet, grounded deep to where I am, X marking the spot of where I can be present now. Whew, that's a great reminder and something I can practice all throughout the week to deepen my trust in God being the God of life and God being the God of resurrection, which is what Christians celebrate on Easter Sunday. So like I said, drop me a little note in the chat or send me an email or text or something if you know how to get a hold of me, and let me know what you experienced in this pausing for peace today. I'm really glad you joined me, and if you've never heard of anything about Holy Week before, it's a good time to you can just go to a Bible app and like put it on listening mode and listen to, if you don't want to listen to the entire gospel, at least start like towards the end of the gospel when Jesus is like entering into the city. You can just read all what transpires, or have read to you what transpires during these very holy days, and be ready to trust a little bit more deeply in God being the God of light, the God of love, the God of life. Thanks so much for being here. See you next time.